Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Automated, our weekly podcast where we talk about robots, this time without even a guest. Of course, I'm Stefan Seltz-Axbacher, CEO and co-founder of Polymath Robotics, and sitting next to me is a gentleman drinking a blue beer, wearing a blue shirt, and generally just feeling kind of blue.
Dabba-dee-dabba-die.
You remember robots in that music video?
I didn't know there was a music video. I guess there was.
You
Never
there's
seen
a
it.
music video for Blue?
Sure.
It was a CGI music video with aliens in the 90s.
Sounds like I missed it.
Yeah, you should have. This is shocking. Hold the presses. This, of course, is Automated, our weekly podcast where we talk about robots, building robots, challenges with building robots, wins in building robots. And Ilia, what are we going to talk about today?
We are going to talk about Aurora's, the autonomous trucking company's recent announcement.
Which I want you to, regardless of when you're listening to this podcast, think to yourself, have you heard anything new from a company called Aurora or Aurora Innovation? And I think that's kind of key to this. And like, this podcast will either become dated if everyone ends up caring about this news, but I think half the story here is that no one seems to.
And we won't spoil it yet, so stay tuned.
So this is Automated, first part of the podcast.
You love the name so much, you got to say 5 times during the intro.
You know, with a name like Stefan Seltz-Axbacher, you get used to using name words for long amounts of time.
I think that's your like umlaut pause, is like instead of saying it, you just like say the name of the podcast again.
We do this podcast in 2 parts. First, we play a game where we make up a dumb robotics company based on a random technology and a random business that we have to apply that technology to. We used to use physical cards, and someone decided to write some code. So on my little web app here, I have a thing all lined up for us. And then we talk about a subject, which of course is going to be Aurora's recent announcement. So with that, let's play a little game. I really hope that even if we edit out my sound effect, we keep my excitement hands.
I think we should edit that down to a clip and just label it Stefan's belly dancing edition.
I think YouTube will cancel.
Yeah.
Like not us, just like they'll be like, we're done.
Yeah.
We're done with video.
No more.
YouTube, we now do text.
Yeah. All the tubes are filled.
So today we got a doozy of a technology to apply to a market. Deep learning to railroads.
Okay.
Yep. So
like that actually feasible.
Yep. This feels like one of those ones where we're going to end up making fun of a real company. We're gonna apply non-deterministic, decision making or analysis to an incredibly deterministic structured system.
Well, so okay, does it have to be a robot or is it just software?
Wait, is this just a software podcast?
Well, I mean, we're famous.
This is a robotics podcast.
Yeah.
We talk about robots. It has to be a robot.
Yeah, I know.
I think this is autonomous trains using deep learning. I think that is what we're talking about.
Maybe. I like the route navigation problem. Like there is actually some reason to
like
use
traveling salesmen with neural net with deep learning.
Yeah, because there is existing traffic patterns you could learn from, right? And so there might be insights there that people have not spotted yet.
Yeah,
there's enough rich data about where trains are going at a given time that you could come up with something theoretically better.
Yeah,
but that's too realistic and boring.
Well, and I wonder what level, if you, unless you are not just building an autonomous train, but building an autonomous rail network and shipping company, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, outside of knowing whether a train has like explosive chemicals or toxic chemicals, if you generally have no idea what's in the train. Yeah. So like knowing where routing should go, like, yes, okay. If you're doing a pickup at a facility that like is grain in whatever, then like there's some number of destinations it's likely going to based on where you're picking it up. But like if you're pulling into the port of Los Angeles, like deep learning, like where do I go from here?
Well, it's even stuff like when should your departure time be? Maybe if you leave 10 minutes later, you'll miss a traffic jam somewhere on the system and arrive a little bit earlier by taking a slightly different route. Like, it's the whole routing question.
I mean, how many route options are there actually, though? I mean,
I bet a lot.
Oh yeah, I don't bet zero.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I mean, trains can't overtake each other outside of on sidings.
Yeah,
So like each tunnel is inherently a narrow tunnel, and that tunnel can go either direction. And like, I mean, I could be talking about literally a tunnel, but really,
yeah,
in the case
yeah,
of rail, it's a tunnel.
yeah.
And I could be either going, it could go either direction. It can't go both at the same time. And
Not productively anyway.
yeah, and like I probably a lot of your routing is like who's making a ripple in this direction and can you follow and branch off to the side as opposed to like a lot of actual freedom of choice.
Something clever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like if you were an individual deep learning train in a deterministic network
No,
of trains,
no, it'd have to be systemic.
yeah,
Yeah, like
you would
a
need to take
train.
over the entire train network.
Yeah, a train wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
Like you need all the trains or most of the trains anyway, enough to care.
I mean, I guess like so a little thing. So trains in the U.S. are fairly manual still. There is a program that the government spent at least $10 billion on called Positive Train Control, which was basically cruise control for trains. I think part of this is the network is big enough with enough big beefy people that it's hard to do anything incrementally. So like could you do stuff like clever drafting of one train to another that are disconnected? I mean that again seems more like a classical controls solution. But if you wanted to do these kind of,
I'd go a different route.
okay.
What I would go actually, one of the main problems, not main problems, but one of the problems with trains is that their stopping distance is so long
Yeah.
that you can't put safety sensors on them and have any hope of a realistic outcome,
Yeah.
right? Like if your train takes 4 miles to stop, there's no existing sensor
Which
that will
is not
see.
which is not actually unreal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean like for the listeners, it's not like a not unstandard unit of measurement for trains is like a 7 mile long train.
Yeah.
And if 7 miles of, rail cars that are individually weighing 250,000 pounds, I think is a real number, are traveling at 50 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour, 80 miles an hour. That's a lot of momentum.
Yeah. There's a lot of mass.
Yeah.
And so if your stopping distances are so insane, it's not reasonable to put sensors on the train, or at least classical sensors on the train to detect things. But I wonder if you could, again, approach it from a systemic point of view where you put cameras on the trains, you put cameras on the tracks, and that's where machine learning would be very useful, where you can start to train it to say, we have a ton of data, we have way too many images coming in, but we've had accidents at these sites. And look for the indicators of somebody inappropriately crossing the railroad, or somebody fell asleep on the tracks, or somebody's car stalled, right? And that's
But again,
sort of data.
could deep learning ever even be one of the better options for that?
Absolutely. I mean, car stalling detection, right?
So
You
like,
need,
I feel like you could, for example, have pressure sensors where if weight went over one rail but not the other, you were like, oh,
yeah, you could spend $50,000 retrofitting pressure sensors onto active rail networks.
okay.
Or
also
you could spend $200 putting a webcam up and feed the data that looks at the intersection. And
for the price of a webcam, you could also just put a stereo camera and do it deterministically.
Yeah, ish. I mean, like, honestly, this is one of the cases, detecting people and detecting cars is one of the things that we've got very well polished in image segmentation, classification. Like, that's very nicely. It's polished enough that people don't even treat it as ML anymore, even though it is.
Yeah.
And that's a case where if you sprinkle a bunch of cheap cameras with cheap networking that do edge-based ML, so they don't stream data constantly because that would be too expensive.
Yeah.
And they're looking for subtle things. They're looking, like, the obvious one is a car stalled on the tracks, but the subtle stuff of, like, this bush has been disturbed. Probably somebody's sleeping right there.
Yeah.
Right? Like that kind of really, really subtle stuff that'd be very hard to detect classically.
Yeah.
You could do with Edge AI and do it relatively cheaply. Like, I could imagine just basically putting up a post every mile with a solar panel powered camera and
Yeah, I mean, I think part
LTE.
of the problem with this though is the parties involved inherently make it expensive. Like not even like the government. Let's say like it was like CSX or like one of the major rail companies. It's really hard to sell organizations like that anything. So it might be a $200 webcam. It might be a $100 solar panel, $50, $25 solar panel. Post might be $10. The crew to install it might be 2 guys, a truck, and like a hammer or something. That might cost $200 per installation.
Yeah,
You know, between like insurance and maybe they have to be unionized.
that's very, and that's my point of making it off the rail network. So off the actual rail, like don't touch the rail itself.
Yeah.
'Cause that's very expensive.
Yeah.
And don't stop traffic.
Yeah.
But just have a guy walk along the side of the tracks and put a stick in the ground, right? Like you
Well-
don't have to.
Okay, so we just got to roughly $500 per post.
Yeah.
Miles of rail network in the U.S. Let's see. Sorry, this is real time. 140,000 miles of rail network.
That's very reasonable.
So 140,000
Yeah.
times $500 each,
Yeah.
$70 million.
That's extremely reasonable. That like that is what did you say the DOT the government allocated for this
$10 billion.
program? Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
this is a drop compared to that.
Yes. However, we didn't budget in any dollars for connectivity long term.
But if you do everything edge based, then your
Well, it still needs
connectivity
to
is very
report when it sees something.
yeah. But that's like a few bytes.
Okay.
Like that's you're okay, double it, triple it if you really want to. You're still talking about a fraction of a percent of what the budget.
To be clear, I'm
allocated
not
for
saying
this.
positive train control was a successful program
Yeah.
or like a well-guided program.
Yeah, but that's like you could
But
solve
like
this. With,
the people to sell something like this at CSX, like my hunch would be if it's $70 million of bill of materials and like labor, it quickly balloons up to $1 billion of like a 7-year, you know, proposal and review process with, it's not just CSX, it's like the
so
11 senior carriers and the blah, blah, blah,
so
blah, blah.
target
11
like
tier ones.
I'm sure they have a hotspot map of the worst incident cases. Target the top 10%.
Yeah.
Right. Just deploy that as your trial. Have these little machines on the corner. Like they're not really robots, but they report out that there's a probable issue, and then you have some level of centralized control, even just a radio, to just tell the guy that like you should start slowing because 4 miles ahead of you, there's a 90% chance that something's wrong.
Yeah.
That's pretty valuable for not very much money.
I mean, I'd say even the central command station to look at stuff like that would probably be new people, which would probably
You could do a lot of software there. Like you could have a dude.
totally could. I also think a lot of these organizations would be freaked out even by the thought that they might know something that if they don't act on, they could cause an accident.
Well, I mean, I mean, is it at that point, is it better to argue that since I don't know it, I can't avoid it?
Is my hunch.
That's pretty negligent. That argument doesn't fly in engineering.
Yeah, in engineering, but like big companies are worse.
Where
than
does the word
government.
engineering come from?
Yeah.
It comes from the dude who puts coal into the
Totally.
engine of a train.
Yes, but like most railroad companies these days are like rent seeking, rentiers.
Yeah.
They're like the network was built 150 years ago. They just kind of make money doing relatively easy stuff. They might buy a box car for like $10,000. It lasts for like 50 years.
Yeah.
At like it makes like a couple $1,000 a month.
I mean, I agree. You know, Nicole's desperately trying to tell us to wrap up, but like policy wise, one derailment of a toxic chemical spill in a town would pay for the next 500 years.
But then
of
how
this
are you going to
program.
buy the town's property for cheap?
Right. But like that one project from a government standpoint would pay for itself instantaneously.
Yeah, way too unreasonable.
Yeah.
All right. What are we going to call it then?
Thinking about it, like whoever the engineer in charge, the first accident that happens that it doesn't detect, he gets railroaded. That's the name.
And with that,
now in lower definition.
Yep.
Back from our break.
We're only
Slightly further away.
we only have one camera this time, and I think it's because the camera that is left is the one that was looking at Ilia, but the one that was like zoomed in on me just like suddenly failed. I think it said will not go on. Do not restart me.
To be clear, the camera is fine. The battery died.
Yeah.
Which just tells me it uses a lot of energy to
You know,
be around you.
With this much beauty, it takes a lot of power to capture my exuberance.
I have been feeling a little bit more tired last week, and I have spent more time in proximity. Are you just one of those energy vampires?
Yes.
That's exactly it.
What's that guy's name?
I forget, but the show I think is
What we do in
Shadows. Yeah.
Well, that actor who's the energy vampire, he actually before he was on any TV, his name will be added by somebody in post, maybe. He was the energy
Insert
vampire
name
in What We
here.
Do in the Shadows. He was in The Office as like kind of the dumb warehouse guy and like helper around the office. He actually made his debut like showing up on local news, pretending to be good at something, and then just failing on live news.
That's amazing.
So there's a video where he's like, he's doing a local news segment where he's like the yo-yo master. And it's like him and the host, and he starts like dropping yo-yos. It's like, oh,
That's
I don't know
so
what's going
solid.
on. Yeah.
Oh my god,
Like,
that's great.
Probably one of the most talented comedians of our time. But yeah,
Awesome.
anyway. So speaking of news, there was relatively big robotics news last week, and the only place where I've organically come across it was like the self-driving cars subreddit. Now, since like Googling it before we recorded this, I've seen other posts about it, but like only when I directly searched for Aurora Innovation News.
And like The Verge covered it and TechCrunch covered it. I saw, but like
I didn't see
no
it.
real comments,
Wasn't
no
shared
real,
in LinkedIn in a way that I saw.
Yeah.
No one's mentioned it to me, like organically.
we have to go digging.
Yeah. And the news is, of course, that Aurora Innovation has started driving driver out trucks in Texas between two of their hubs, which makes them, the third or fourth company to ever do driver out on a public highway, which is a huge, incredible accomplishment. And, is like one of the, like, either them or Torque is probably like the last real chance that like self-driving trucks are going to be a thing in the next couple of years.
How do you feel about their co-founder's post saying this was the first commercial unmanned?
I think it was very specifically phrased to make it sound like first and not, yeah. Ilia read that he was claiming that this is the first ever, but his phrasing was, this is the first commercial driverless service, because maybe they're hauling freight. Whereas Starsky, my previous company, did a driver out public highway test back in 2019 with, spending, I want to say 1/100th to 1/300th as much money as Aurora. But I think there's an interesting thing here in that, like, from here, like, the announcement did not gain that much press. In fact, their shares went down the day of the announcement. They've gone down in the last week. Now, the market is generally weird, but this is not great. And I think kind of fundamentally, it's been a nothing burger because most people think this has been happening for a while, and it's yet to be commercially relevant.
Yeah.
And like, it almost like a problem in hyperrobotics is, excitement about your product is in some ways like a bank account. And if you withdraw too much before your product is real, there's not a lot left. And like in the broader autonomous truck industry withdrew heavily back in like 2015 to 2020. I remember in 2019 trying to fundraise on our self-driving, our driver out run, and people were saying like, yeah, but everyone's doing it all the time. And I think there's a weird thing here where if companies are over raising on the promise of the future, they're mortgaging their future. I don't know, they're some version of that.
Yeah, and you have to do that balance some of the time, right? Like startups in many ways are selling the dream pretty early on. But yeah, I even went, when we talked about this before, I even went so far as to say, like, I wonder if Aurora intentionally / unintentionally didn't call as much attention to it as they could have. I mean, they announced it, their CEO put out a Twitter post, blah, blah, blah. But like, there's a reason why they might not want to say after 8 years or whatever the number is, that they're just now starting to do commercial unmanned use cases.
Mm-hmm.
Because to your point, like, that sounds like, well, what the heck have you guys been doing for the last 8 years?
And also, like, if it took this long to do it the first time or the first, regular time, how much longer is it going to take for it to be commercially relevant?
Yeah, and to be crystal clear, neither Stefan nor I are saying, like,
no,
Aurora does not deserve the credit.
Yeah,
hopefully that's like super clear.
This is a huge accomplishment.
Yeah.
And I think like more of the concerning thing is that like it's a huge accomplishment that the market doesn't care about. Like realistically,
or is actually in fact disincentivized.
Yeah, like Aurora's shares should have doubled.
Yeah,
like they
well, their total sales didn't fall by 74%. So what do you want?
But I mean, like there's a huge de-risking of them as a company, and like the market had doesn't care.
Doesn't care.
And yeah, I don't know where you like. I mean, like there's also recently news that we're not going to quote by name because of the nature of it, where a major robotics company who's been making a lot of waves, someone did an investigative journalism article saying like, hey, maybe their deployments aren't as real as they're saying, and their CEO was like, yeah, we're going to sue them, which you probably know who I'm talking about. But there's a bit of this like, oh, when we get caught in the thing that it is harder than we thought it was going to be, like, huh, shucks.
Well, and you have no option at that point, right?
Yeah.
Like, I've never seen, and I think by its very nature, I don't think it's possible for a robotics program to get faster as they get closer and closer, right? Like, there's always this like
Asymptotic?
it's very asymptotic. It's this 80-20 problem where like 80% you feel is like, I got it working, the last 20%, whatever. But then it's like, that's double your effort.
Yeah.
The last 20% of that is double your effort.
Yep.
And by that point, if you have a stable product that's deployed in a bunch of different markets, then you're really dealing with the weird stuff.
Yep.
That's very, very rare and very hard to fix.
Yeah, but if you fundamentally don't have a product until you're at the 98, 99, 99.9% range,
Yeah.
you suddenly look like a company that has to go 8 years and spend $3 billion before you have your first like kind of relevant thing.
And I don't know if like any other commonly understood good is like that. Like
Yeah.
if you think of a cell phone,
Yeah.
your first one is very hard to build. Your second one is very hard to build. But by
Yeah.
like your iPhone 16, the process is so well tuned
Yeah.
that like they can reliably output an iPhone every year, every
Yep.
2 years, right?
Yep.
And the risk factor is low. Whereas robots, I think the more and more further you get, the harder and harder it gets. Again, because these
Yeah.
edge cases.
Yeah.
Right? There's a reason why.
Unless you do like very disciplined product
Yeah,
management.
yeah, or unless it's very, very specifically scoped,
Yeah.
right? But like, there's a reason Waymo being clever is being careful about their rollout process and
Yeah.
is not deploying everywhere in the world all at once.
Yep.
Because like that would be a disaster.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if other products follow this trend, and I
Yeah.
don't think maybe investors or the public understands that that's.
Yeah, I mean, I was
Pretty
talking
unique.
to a founder the other day who raised a bunch of money from a big strategic who basically wanted to put something on their robot for some use case. And that strategic had their like kind of captive VC, who they're a big LP in, invest in this company, and then like doubled the investment with their own of like, yeah, let's go, do this thing. And then, testing of the robot was harder and things took a while. There was a couple of bad tests. And the big corporate strategic just like kind of lost interest and wandered off. And I think like there's this thing in robotics where you have to simultaneously maintain hype or maintain some level of excitement without like over spoiling the big things to come. So that when the big things show up, people like still care.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, don't throttle your news too much so that you don't get outraised by groups that are doing the opposite of that.
Yeah. Because
Right?
I mean,
Like, that's the balance.
Because like also like in a market like self-driving trucking, kind of everyone was making massive claims and massive promises and massive here's what we're going to do, which meant that like, it wasn't like Aurora on their own making bigger claims than they could. It was the whole market and them keeping up or being a part of it or what have you. Like, I mean, similarly, I would not be surprised if listeners had no idea that Torque Robotics, Daimler's autonomous truck division, also did a driver out run on a closed road in November or October, which, given that Daimler bought Torque in 2018, 2019 for $600 million, and given that took till 2024 to do, is a pretty big, like, the world did not like jump for joy at that happening. They got way less credit than they should have, all because like in this market, it's how's that news?
Yeah.
How's that news? Like in some ways, like the claims of self-driving, like robots are going to do X, sucks away from the like, oh yeah, the robots finally did X.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know how to get around that.
Yeah.
Like that's.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're almost like struggling to have an interesting conversation about it.
Because like
It's just kind of like restating like this is hard and
Yeah.
Because like really smart people busted their butt for years at Aurora to make this happen.
Right.
And like people like took strategic risks and put their neck on the line and did things that like were hard and uncomfortable and required really real chutzpah to do. And like Chris Urmson's not going to be on the cover of Time magazine for this.
Yeah.
Like, confidently. And even if they scale up to 100 trucks driving every day, like, the moment's kind of passed.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked before about like hyperrobotics companies versus like reasonable or discount cash flow. And like kind of like the risk is they now have some window where they have to jump from promise to real results. And like to your point, like their technical effort hasn't gotten easier between that jump.
Yeah.
So they now need to do like heavy validation of new routes, a heavy validation of their existing system to go from what I assume is one truck driving once a week, maybe once a day, to, I don't know, for them to be a relevant company, they probably need in the range of 15,000 trucks driving 22 days a week, 14 hours a day. Sorry, 22 days a month, 14 hours a day, no person in it.
And I mean, that would put them at a larger scale than Waymo is. Probably.
And that would put them, if they were the trucking company, which I'm never quite sure what their model is meant to be. If they were the trucking company, I think that would make them roughly break even.
Yeah.
Well, not profitable, but like break even is probably 12,000, 14-hour day, 22 days a month, 12 months a year trucks from now.
They're robots. They can work 24 hours a day.
That would be even better.
Right.
That would be way better. Like if cool, then it's, roughly probably in the range of like 7,000 to 9,000 trucks, 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
And that's also assuming the local freight rates on the routes that they can drive don't go down because of the the new specific capacity. That is, I'm assuming overall rates stay the same. If each truck, if just like the non-robot truck is $150,000, we're talking about
Probably double that.
150,000 times 10,000.
Times 10,000?
Yeah.
Oh. I'm terrible at that kind of math.
Oh yeah, me too. Okay, I thought you're supposed to be better at this stuff. 150 million, $15 billion of capex.
Yeah.
$15 billion of capex, not including lidars or compute.
Right. And so it's double that.
At least.
It's 30.
Yeah.
Right.
And if they can't, or like a clever financing structure for that, which is possible, but like that's the challenge now. And they don't have 10 years, and they have more than 6 months.
Yeah.
But like somewhere in 6 months to 10 years, they have to get
to solve that problem. Yeah.
And that's now a pretty big and meaty robotics challenge.
Yeah.
And especially if like the market doesn't care about the technical accomplishment, they're gonna have to fall back on business accomplishments really quickly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that proof of, again, we haven't seen the details of it. I don't think they've published very much, but that proof of one route is unknown as to how far that goes beyond that, right? Like, how expensive is it for the
like
second
Starsky's route was like a rest area to a rest area.
Yeah.
Like there was no freight moving just between those two places. There would not be a business in that.
Yeah.
And in fact, like if their route is less than an 8-hour drive, which I assume it is, like there's significantly less rest area. There's significantly less market for it, which means like they might actually have several more technical accomplishments before it is a how quickly can you scale up. And man, I really wish them well because like
100%.
Like something like 1 in 10 trucks are in an accident every year. Trucking is this kind of, the inefficiency of trucking is this massive economic tax on the overall system. If this works, it like has the possibility of greatly lowering the cost of living for kind of everyone in every country with good highways. But yeah, now the challenge is how do you get 10,000 trucks driving 14 hours a day, 22 days a month?
Yeah.
And what sucks about that is I assume that you'll see a bleed off of technical talent and motivation.
Why? Say more.
That's not that fun.
Oh, I see. Different skill set.
Different skill set, but also just like, that's just not that interesting of work. I feel like a lot of roboticists have gone from starting a stack to starting a stack to starting a stack to starting a stack, and new application, new application, new application, new application. But if it's like hey, we validated our system on this 2-hour stretch of road. Now we have to do an 8-hour stretch of road that is like 3% difference in like 14 different single half-mile segments.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It tends to be a different skill set.
Yeah.
I found it's very rare to find an engineer who both wants to make dramatically new stuff and wants to spend time polishing 0.1% performance off a stack.
Yeah.
Like that's a very different skill set.
And like building out, like, remember at Starsky, we're thinking about like, how do we validate that new routes fit within our ODD programmatically? Like tooling like that is probably is almost certainly more important than machine learning.
Yeah.
Or AI stuff is. You when you have these like large organizational structures of high ego, high performing people, like probably the machine learning people, just to pick a number, 3 years ago, were some of the most important people at Aurora. And now they're probably among the least. But like people don't deal with those sorts of changes in importance very well. Like I always thought like with Zoox, for example, the second Zoox had a working robotaxi, the machine learning team would go from being among the most important to like now manufacturing is the most important.
Yeah.
But then like after manufacturing is really important, suddenly the people who do like route planning and the app are the most important. And like a lot of organizations can't survive that sort of
Shift.
pivot from one group being important to another.
Yeah,
which
that's
is
a good point.
Yeah, which is like not a problem most robotics companies have gone through. Like I actually imagine at ClearPath you guys saw it going from a bunch of kind of one-off research robots to like the boring automotors thing.
ClearPath
And iRobot probably saw the same problem.
Yeah, I mean, ClearPath particularly spun up the automotors division as like a separate group.
Yeah.
And it ended up being two sister companies under one parent name.
Yep.
And so that wasn't as bad.
But that seems like a solution to that problem.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
That seems like
It
an
is.
intentional, like,
Very much so. Very much so.
Like the most like in automotors, the salespeople, the product folks who are thinking about like how do we interact with different warehouse management systems,
Yeah.
are way more important than the roboticists.
Yeah. Once it's built.
Yeah.
Once
But like, assuming automotors was starting with like a jackal,
Yeah.
at that moment, it was a like, yeah, listen, nerd. We got real problems to think about, which is
It wasn't quite that fast. You know, the group had to do a lot of work to actually get to reliable industrial deployment, and that was a big effort.
Yep, which was also a different skill set than
Exactly.
crank out an experimental robot.
Exactly.
Yep.
Which that was, I think, the biggest shift was to go from here's a new feature, we should test it, to your new feature should go through 80 hours of simulation testing and 200 hours of real testing, and then maybe we'll merge it in.
Yep.
That's a different skill set.
Yep. And how did automotors, how were they able to pull it off? Like what's it look like along the way?
So I think they kept the ClearPath brand as kind of
The parent.
No, it's kind of like an independent. They were both like under an umbrella.
Sure.
And the research products group was kept as here's a way to generate goodwill with the community, keep the name out there, keep the brand alive, generate some revenue. It was cash flow positive, and basically pulled the people who had been doing custom, complicated consulting and integration work into the automotors team. That's how that division was. And then early on, there was a lot of really new, custom, complicated efforts on things like path planning and motion planning and even mechanical design.
But like organizationally, what did you see Ryan and the others do at the broader group to separate out those two teams? I mean, like you joined in like 2012-ish. Yeah. Auto was spun out of its own thing 2015, 2016?
A little earlier than that, but yeah.
And you left like 2018, 2019?
Something like that.
So like you actually saw the company Amoeba.
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty quick, honestly. Like and obviously Ryan knows this way better than I do, but the leadership intent was pretty clear on what auto should be in the split.
Yep.
And so it was a pretty quick, like, here's an abrupt transition, which I think did well.
Yeah.
And it pulled in people. So at the time, there was a project, I think that was called Mjolnir, which was this very, very large custom, like it was, I think, 30 feet long, custom kind of pallet mover for a client. And a lot of the people who had done the mechanical and electrical and even software controls for that basically took that knowledge and rebuilt this completely different robot. So there was this natural transition point, which I thought went well. The other transition from the manufacturing standpoint was ClearPath always built their own robots.
Yep.
And so they increased the scope of the production team and kind of built it up a little bit, and then had them build both ClearPath robots and automotive robots for a while.
Yeah.
And so that skill set was fairly transferable. That group didn't really know. I mean, they had more complicated robots to build with higher specs and higher standards, but that wasn't as big of a difference for them. But yeah, it was pretty quick, pretty intentional. There was a little bit of churn at the time. I think the churn started happening, as you said, after you got into
when people realized this was forever,
like maintenance mode. Yeah, exactly. Like the robots are out. There's improvements to make. There's new generations to build, but like it's mostly there.
Yep.
That's when the churn started happening. But the initial launch and build up, I didn't think caused much. There was a lot of excitement around it.
Yeah. Yeah. So like, I mean, I think for Aurora, what it seems like the thing to do right now is probably think about how did they split the organization from the portion of the research people they care about keeping long term from the people who
have to product,
who have to get to 10,000 to like 10,000 if they're their own trucking company, probably in the range of 200,000 if they're selling through OEMs, and like that group needs to pretty aggressively split off and do their own thing, or they'll be fighting themselves as much as they're fighting the robots.
Yeah, or there'll be organizational chaos for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. Well, that's on that depressing note.
I mean, it's exciting. Not a lot of companies get to the point where they have to become real. Not a lot of robotics companies get to the point where they have to be real, like, pain in the ass, boring companies.
I'm liking this like very positive outcome. So here's your two career paths, roboticist. Join a robotic startup, it fails.
Yeah.
Join a robotic startup, it succeeds, and you get bored with it. Like you're doomed either way.
Yeah. I mean, that speaks to maturity of robotics, that like that's such a rare thing that there are roboticists who only work on like scale robotics deployments.
Yeah, that's pretty rare. That's
like there's like outside of defense and outside of like vacuum cleaners, there's not really companies.
And industrial arms. That's the big one.
Yeah. But dumb industrial arms.
Yeah.
Like, there's not a huge amount of smart industrial arms.
Yeah.
So like I think we're seeing a chance for a birth of a company, an organization of roboticists working on production stuff that has to scale, but the organizational stuff might mean it never gets there.
Yeah. Interesting hidden challenge.
Yeah. What are we talking? Well, because robotics is such an easy road to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. It's the only
one
impediment.
More challenge. How hard can it be?
Yeah.
While they're at it, they should just build an app and probably a load board.
That's right.
Ilia, what are we going to talk about next week?
Well, I think we missed 2 weeks in a row, so probably nothing. But week after that, we'll have to find out.
It'll be something great. It'll be the best episode ever next week to 6 weeks from now. Somewhere there.
If you don't see it, email Stefan.
Personally. My personal email is ilya.baronoff@gmail.com.
Oh, that poor soul.
Well, thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.
See you next time.